better have the best Trinities in your deck, ready for the final round. Cause this is Trinity Yugioh, but you're here for a deck breakdown.
Hello everyone, this is Meatmo27 with another Trinity deck breakdown. Today we're going to be looking at a deck that's been sweeping the TCG meta, Salamangreat. Now, it's important to note that this deck is nowhere near as good in Trinity as it is in TCG because the deck is really hard hit by the summon limit. But that doesn't mean that the deck is completely unplayable like it might seem at first on paper. So let's go into the deck. The first card that we have is Salamangreat Jaguar. This card is nowhere near as good as it is in TCG because special summoning it from the graveyard by shuffling back by returning a Salamangreat monster is just it doesn't really help you because you can't extend the combo too much further than that, but it can be useful as an 1800 beater, and to extend in later turns, it's probably one of the first Salamangreats I would cut, honestly. We have Salamangreat Wolvie. This card is pretty good because we run a lot of revival in the form of Buddy Force. We run recycling with Sunlight Wolf. So its effects can proc, and it's just another card to help us make Beta Links or other Salamangreat Link monsters. Then we have Falco. This is probably the best Salamangreat main deck monster because it can keep recycling mainly Salamangreat Rage from the graveyard so that we can use it turn after turn. Then we have Salamangreat Gazelle. This is key to a turn 1 combo that we invest in, where you normal summon Gazelle, dump Salamangreat Roar the counter trap, make Beta Link search Sanctuary, make another Beta Links to reset Roar. This combo works in 3 summons and ends with a Beta Links that can protect itself from destruction once, and 1 Omni negation in the form of Roar, which can help us then climb in later turns into better Link plays such as Sunlight Wolf. Then we have Spinny. The attack boost is sometimes relevant because our monsters are so weak, and it can revive itself in the graveyard more generically than something like Jaguar, which makes it useful for extending into those higher rating Link plays later on. Then we run 1 Foxy and Foxer. Neither of these have particularly useful on-board effects, but their graveyard effects are useful because they can help remove spells and traps from the field, which is really good because this deck is extremely vulnerable to disruption. Then our final Salamangreat is Raccoon. It may not seem that good on first glance, but the fact that it's a card that can make our Salamangreat Links and also protect our Salamangreat Links when they're on the board for later turn Link climbing is extremely important. Then we have 1 Flame Buffalo. This card is very good because it helps us cycle through the deck for traps and other good unsearchable cards, and also is a Fire Cyberse, which is really important for making those big plays like Heat Leo and Sunlight Wolf. We have Lady Debug. This card is nowhere near as good as it is in the TCG because we can't search Gazelle and then use Gazelle in the same turn because of the summon limit, but being able to search Gazelle on a 1-turn delay is still good enough to warrant running this card. Then we have Rom Claudia. This card is really good as a recovery play because it can summon any Cyberse back from your graveyard, and this includes your Cyberse Link monsters, and it floats, which just makes the card really strong for the mid-game. We run Phantom Skyblaster. Is just a good generic Link card that helps us climb into those bigger Link plays. We have Formwood Skipper. This card is particularly good for this deck because we can reveal something like Sunlight Wolf, and with 2 monsters, we can then make a Sunlight Wolf that is technically summoned using its own name, which lets us use his recycle effect immediately, which is extremely important since the summon limit is something this deck struggles with so much. Then we run a Tour Guide engine. I opted to run Archfiend Eccentric over Skarm just because the deck already has a decent amount of discard targets and has such a hard time with back row. Then I run 1 Ash, which is something we can actually recycle with Sunlight Wolf, and 1 Ghost Ogre just as another flexible hand trap. For the spells, we've got Foolish Burial and Foolish Burial Goods. Foolish Burial because there's a lot of cards in our deck that synergize with the graveyard, and Foolish Burial Goods because it lets us dump Salamangreat traps to reset or re-add using either Falco or Sunlight Wolf. Then we have Called by the Grave, just helps us get past hand traps. We have 2 pieces of back row removal to deal with the opponent's back row. Salamangreat Circle is a generic searcher that flexes into any of our Salamangreat monsters. Then we have Will of the Salamangreat. This card is really good once again for mid-game, which is something that this deck really needs to have, since it's easy without these kinds of recovery cards to fold in mid-game if they manage to break through your Link monsters 1 or 2 times. Then we have Salamangreat Sanctuary. This card is really easy to get out of deck fast by using Bale Links, and while not the best, does help us get into Sunlight Wolf Summon using itself and things like that later on. Then we have Cynet Backdoor. This helps us protect our Cyberse Link monster, usually Bale Links turn 1, and we can use it to search something like 4-mode Skipper, and then on the next turn make a Sunlight Wolf summoned with itself. And mid-game you can use it to protect something like Sunlight Wolf and search pretty much any other Cyberse in your deck. Premature Burial is another recovery card. Pot of Desires is in here because there's not that many cards that we absolutely need to have and would just lose if we banish them. Pretty much the only ones that even sort of fall into this category are Sanctuary, which is very easy to summon before using Desires, and our Salamangreat Roar, which once again is relatively easy for the deck to get into the graveyard first. Then we have Pot of Avarice because we run enough Link monsters and main deck monsters that we're going to be filling the graveyard relatively fast, and recovering all those Link monsters into the extra deck can be key, especially mid or late game. Then we have Super Team Buddy Force Unite. This card is really good in this deck because almost all of our monsters are Cyberse, and it lets us summon Links back and on the opponent's turn so we can avoid the summon limit. Then we just run some power traps. We run 3 Mirror Forces essentially, because it once again is key to keep our Link monster alive for a turn so we can make those higher Link plays later on. Then we have Cyberse Beacon. This is just another way to get into Gazelle or Falco, because we're going to be taking damage almost inevitably early on because our monsters are so weak. Then we have Limit Code. This is one of the deck's main win cons. We can use it to summon Transcode Talker in the extra deck, which we can then use to set up big boards that can make OTKs. Then we have Salamangreat Roar, generic counter trap, which I already described a good combo for. If you hard draw this and actually can recycle it, that's also extremely powerful. And Rage, which I almost think is better a lot of the time in Trinity, because that being able to pop 2 cards by targeting Sunlight Wolf each turn is extremely strong, and recycling it with the Sunlight Wolf or Falco each turn is going to often let you win the game just through sheer advantage within a few turns. Then I spent 2 Trinities on Salamangreat Circle just because this deck really wants to open into that Gazelle play, and this really helps us get there, and in mid-game it helps us flex into other Salamangreats to extend our combos, recycle traps, remove the opponent's spell and traps, or other kinds of flexible plays. Then for the extra deck, the first thing is our last Trinity, which is an extra copy of Salamangreat Bale Links. This is because we need 2 of them to perform the combo I described earlier with Gazelle. Then we run Borreload just because it's a deck that's reviving Link 2s, so it's going to be pretty easy to climb into Borreload, and Borreload is just a really strong card. Then we run Power Code Talker and Transcode Talker. Both of these cards are our targets for Limit Code. Transcode Talker is almost always going to be one you actually go into, since he can revive something like Sunlight Wolf, which will be co-linked to it, which you can then use to break through the opponent's board and deal a lot of damage. But Power Code Talker can also come up and is theoretically easier to summon outside of that, but it is, I think, the first Link monster that I would cut from the extra deck if we wanted to swap something else in. Then we run 2 Salamangreat Heat Leo. This is unbound, so we can run as many as we want without having to increase the main deck size. But we don't really go into Heat Leo that often because it is a relatively high Link rating monster and isn't that strong, so we don't really end up needing more than 2 ever. Then we run 3 Sunlight Wolf. Much like in TCG, this card is extremely good. It recycles fire monsters, it resets your traps. It's crucial to the deck that you get into a Sunlight Wolf summon using itself. That's the main goal of the deck. Then we run a Nightmare package just because it's a Link deck, and the Nightmares are extremely good toolbox cards for Links. We run Wee Witch's Apprentice for the Stongon Tour Guide combo, and lastly we run Flame Administrator. This card is really crucial because it's both a Fire Cyber, so we can use it in synergy with all of our other Fire Cyber support cards like Buddy Force, our Salamangreat Links, and also it helps boost our Salamangreat Links to be strong enough that they can actually beat over the opponent's monsters, because that's something that the deck really struggles with otherwise.
your strength.